Abaju. Miigwech for asking me to say a few words, and I'm honored to do so. I've thought a lot about the river. I went down by the river today, actually, so I could really understand a little bit about maybe how my ancestors felt about the river more so, even though I think about it a lot. For a long time, the Anishinaabe have used that river. We used it in a good way, what we say a good way. And so it was used that way for many years. Well, there came a time when we lost control of how we used that river. And in that time, there was 4 dams were put into that river and blocked it up, and all the trees removed from the banks all up through the river system. So many things changed, and it stayed that way for many years. Well, now 3 of those dams are out. The river has changed dramatically with the removal of 3 dams. And looking around the room, see all these faces, it helps me to understand how I feel. Even though I have that connection through my people to that river, I understand that all the people sitting here have the same kind of feeling I do for the river. And they wouldn't take time to be here to understand and to talk and try to have their say. So with that, I'd like to say that, we were kind of hoping to do a smudge before we did it. Smudging is really just, as he was saying, just a way, as we go through life, we get these negative things daily sticking to us, and that just kind of hangs on us. As Anishinaabe, we look at smudging as a way of just kind of releasing that. Smudge yourself, it's symbolically a way of cleansing all that negative energy away from us, and it really does work. And so, we were hoping to do that, and now that I see the faces out here, it really is helping me to understand that this is a major thing, and it means a lot to a lot of people and a lot of different groups. And so with that, we all have to understand that at one time, my people didn't have a choice about what we did to the river. But now we're at the point where we all have a choice, including my people. We all have a choice about what we do to the river, but we all love that portion of what we want it for. So it's a big burden on the river again, just like it was when they dammed it up. So now, as people, if we try to do this in a good way and think about the river over our needs, I think we can accomplish this thing. And personally, I have a feeling, I have a trust of the people in Michigan, the engineers, the biologists, that, this is going to be a showpiece when we get to the point of doing this scary piece with what kind of fish are we going to let up the river. I trust that we have smart, intelligent people that won't mess it up. This will happen, and I don't have any control, but I have confidence that the people working on it are going to dive in and make this a showcase that we're proud of. So let's just we got to hold our breath a little bit on it, but I have trust in them. So anyhow, with that's good enough, I think, and that's all. Just do this, try doing it the way, as we said, in our ways, is let's do this in a good way, and we will do it in a good way. I'll be glad.
Great, thank you, Hank. Can you hear me? Am I on back there? Great, okay. So thank you all for coming. I want to make sure we give proper credit to Tom White. This is the second event that I've been a part of here that Tom has organized. And the first was in August. I imagine many of you were here. And he did such a good job that I said, why don't we do another one and keep this conversation about the Boardman River going? And I'm involved in over the years, I've moderated many community forums and events. And I can tell you, Tom works particularly hard to set a good panel and get all the details right and put on a good event. And I'd also like to just offer a praise in that this is he's doing this on behalf of the Brook Trout Coalition, which, as the name would imply, has a fairly specific area of interest with the river, but they've worked hard to have a broad conversation, and we're here tonight talking about paddling because of that. So thank you, Tom, for all your work. At Interlochen Public Radio, we have reported on what's been happening on the Pine River and other rivers under the management of the U.S. Forest Service. And I think in particular, the attempt or discussion about instituting an alcohol ban provides a good lesson for people interested in the Boardman. And I think the lesson is, once you develop a group of stakeholders that have an expectation of the river and the experience that's available on the river, it's very hard to walk that back. And so I think this conversation here tonight is about what is the expectation that the community has for the Boardman River, what would it take to get there, and what management tools and steps would be required for that expectation to be met and then endure into the future. So that's kind of our agenda as we carry on our discussion tonight. So immediately to my left is Patrick Ertel, who is with the Department of Natural Resources Natural Rivers Program. And as some of you may know, the Boardman River is in the Natural Rivers Program. And that means there is actually a plan written for the upper river that dates back to the mid-1970s. So Patrick, maybe you could start us out tonight by just telling us a little bit about the Natural Rivers Program and why the Boardman is in it and what the plan says.
Sure. The Boardman River is a designated natural river. There are 16 rivers in Michigan that are designated as a state natural river. What that means is that it has a system or a series of qualities that the state felt were worth giving a higher protection. So a plan was written with community members involved. There are 10 values of the Natural Rivers Program that are protected, that drive the decision-making. That plan was written to protect those values, and it creates a zoning system that doesn't restrict use, it just regulates the intensity of use, sort of the closer to the water that you get, with the intent of leaving not only a river corridor, but a corridor for wildlife that may be traveling alongside of the river as well. And so there are vegetation setback. You can't cut vegetation within a certain distance. And then there's a building setback, which means your house has to be further than the vegetation setback, and so on and so forth. That zone is 0 feet to 400 feet away from the river on both sides. And not everything is designated. So if you're really curious of whether you're in the zone or not, I can look that up for you. But the majority of the upper Boardman down to about the Hammond-Hartman line is protected.
And what does it say about paddling?
What it says about paddling is primarily it says that commercial use shall be capped or limited in the Natural Rivers District. It does protect boating as a recreation. So if you want to grab a kayak and float, that is a value that we do protect in the Natural Rivers Program. It's the commercialized aspect of it that's limited.
And I think it uses a term.
Oh, yeah.
That I thought you could explain, carrying capacity, which is an interesting term, but maybe you could tell us what it says and what carrying capacity means to the state of Michigan.
So it's a lot of legal language, and if you have trouble falling asleep tonight, you may borrow this. But in particular, it's talking about boating and canoeing, and it talks about non-motorized boating and canoeing are permitted. The goal is to discourage it upstream of the forks so that we can leave as many deadfalls across the river as habitat. It goes on to restrict commercial activity above Brown Bridge. And then it says The following items were recommended by the committee to help avoid user conflict, trespass, and littering. And number one on that list is to determine the carrying capacity of the river to boat traffic. So it's the idea of saying how many boats is the right amount before we start to tip the scales towards taking away from those 10 values and sort of getting away from the natural character of the river. That has not been done.
So this was work. This was something left to be determined.
That's right. And that's sort of a preface before any expansion of activities occurs to go through that process. Maybe a recreation plan, for example, is something that would do that. There is one developed for the Upper Manistee, which is a natural river as well. But one of the things it does is it starts to lay out how far of a paddle it is between access sites. And then we limit the number of the development of the number of access sites. So rather than saying we need an access site every half an hour on your float, we say, here's the recreation plan. If you only want to float a half an hour, you should plan your float accordingly where there are access points closer together.
All right, Steve, let's hop down to you and tell us what you see out there on the river. In our conversations before tonight, you mentioned, you pointed out we don't have any data. We have no numbers that tell us clearly what's happening, but in your observation, there's a lot more people out there.
Yeah, I actually, I've started working on the Boardman back in 1988, and there were a lot of paddlers in the upper part of the river system. Up above Ranch Rudolph, Sid Melody are here. Their business, large part of their business relied on paddling and tubing the river, and they've been very good stewards of the river. Over the years, as more and more people, as this area has developed, we see more and more residential use and visitor use of the river. And now with the dams removed, we've actually seen a shift in the use of the river from, let's say, Brown Bridge or Shumsky down to Beitner Landing, from upstream from Scheck's down to Brown Bridge because of the dam removal. So we've seen a big shift in the use, and I think some of the property owners will attest to that. So it's not out of control yet. It can be. I know there's some property owners here that would, say it's out of control, and but on some days. But we've seen on a hot summer sunny day, Reb Ratliff from the Conservation District is here and is caretaker at Brown Bridge. I think we counted like 60 plus cars in the lower parking area at Brown Bridge, and that was just from the locals and visitors. And so the river is, now that the dams are out, it's a different river. We're seeing, a lot of interest because of that, and we just have to get a grasp on the balance between recreational uses, that carrying capacity of the river from a paddling standpoint. When's it fishing time? I stopped into the trail camp there at Scheck's, and I watched a young man fly fishing there, and I was talking to him, and a paddler came through, and so he had to pull in his line. No more than that, paddler went through, he got his line back out, another paddler, and another paddler, and it was just like he couldn't even fish. And so where's that time that we then manage that river for a different type of recreation? And so that's the kind of stuff that we need to look at through a recreation plan. And also just kind of right now, I don't know if it's the future of recreation that we're going to determine tonight, as the name of the forum is, but at least gather information and get everybody kind of understanding what are the rules and regulations that currently exist, and hear from you guys about what your thoughts and concerns are.
All right, thanks. Joe, let's go to you. So Joel Molnar is a conservation officer. He supervises conservation officers across northern Michigan. So do your officers get called to the Boardman at all very much?
So my officers, I cover from Leelanau County down to Oceana County. I supervise 11 counties. It then breaks down to, I have 3 sergeants who oversee the officers, and ultimately, on average, 2 officers per county. Officers do get called to the Boardman. We also get called to other rivers that do have higher number of paddlers, whether it be the Manistee or the Pine, and then also my officers in the southern part of the district, they also appear Marquette. So we do patrol numerous river systems, but also in that time, we're also patrolling the lakes, ORV operation. I mean, any recreation use by conservation officers are going to be targeting, to provide enforcement so that way everyone can safely enjoy the resource. For those that do not know what a conservation officer is, we are fully sworn police officers. We have the same authority and jurisdiction as what the Michigan State Police have, but we primarily focus on recreation law.
What are the common calls that come in related to paddling?
So in paddling, some of the common calls that we might have are rowdy and boisterous paddlers. And one thing we all have to remember is that people have freedom of speech. And even though we might not agree with some of the things some people might say, or the tone or the loudness they might play certain types of music with certain types of words, it does fall under freedom of speech. And in many situations and times where we might respond to a complaint, there is little to no laws in place that would regulate the behavior that people are complaining about.
Are there any?
So there are instances. We do have a disorderly person, which is what many people might relate to some of the behaviors they see. But there's a couple different parts to that law. You have to be drunk in a public place and pose a direct threat to someone's safety. So just simply being intoxicated in the river and maybe speaking in a very loud tone doesn't make someone violating that law. So there are laws in place, public, decency laws. If someone is exposing themselves in public, again, there's those aspects that we can deal with and will deal with when we encounter them. But many of the activities, and again, what we receive complaints on are not actual violations of the law.
Thank you. All right, Troy Daly, so you run Paddle for Pints and Kayak, Bike, and Brew. Most of the commercial paddling is on the lower river through the city where you operate. Tell us how you got into this and what is happening with your business.
It was an idea of going down the river. Started in 2013. Paddled down the river with some friends and went to some establishments, and breweries, and it was just an idea that became into what it is now. And so officially launched 2 events in 2014, Paddle for Pints, which I'll give a little history. Paddle for Pints is a paddle crawl on the river. We stop at 4 or 5 breweries in about a 6-hour time frame. We create an experience. And that is more of an event style rather than a tour. It's an event. And so there's only like a certain amount of events that happen on an annual basis. And those amount of dates grew from the popularity as the years went on. 2017 was the height of these events. And then we scaled them back. After that, 2018 was 20 events. Last year was actually 21 events, and this year's gonna be 16 events. In 2016, with the popularity of the event styles that I was doing, created Kayak, Bike, and Brew, which is half on a bike and half on a kayak. We stop at 3 breweries in a 4-hour tour. 1 on a bike, 2 on a kayak. We launch all of our tours at Hull Park, right behind the library here, and all the tours end at Clinch Park, right downtown. I can go into a lot more detail.
Let me ask you a couple of questions. I was surprised when you told me you don't allow your customers to put beer in their kayaks.
Yes, so
You want to give them bail out at that point?
this was starting this business. You learn things, and my goal as just me. I mean, I grew up here. My mom and dad own Kilwins. I grew up there, and for 27 years, they are owner operators of it. Still, right now, if you go in there, that's where they are. That's where I grew up since I was 8 years old. And so, I'm a local. I'm from here. I care about the river. The river is right behind Kilwins. I walked down there every day as a kid, and we are a tourist area, but also respect that there are locals that use the asset that we have that goes right through the middle of right downtown. With the growth of the breweries and the city and the tourism, this all just kind of happened naturally and created this event. But that being said, we didn't have rules right when we began because we didn't know what we were actually doing, and learned the being stewards of the river and trying to keep it clean, and being able for other people to use it as well, which are big aspects of what we actually do. We in the last few years, we don't allow any alcohol on our tours on the river. We go to those establishments. We want to patron those ones, so people. What I offer is an experience. What I don't want to offer is a reason for people to get drunk, or that's not what we or my guides portray to anybody. We provide an experience, and the alcohol is the added bonus. We can't control everybody. I'm not going to say that we don't have problems and we don't have issues, but for the amount of kayakers that we put down the river, I think we do a pretty good job.
Maybe finally, what do you think of the carrying capacity of the lower part of the river? Is there?
Yeah.
You have a handful of competitors. How much more business could be done?
Yeah, so
no more room?
That's going back to our height of our 2017 and what I was saying about the experience. We want to provide an experience. People are coming here. A lot of people that I'm learning, over 80% now of the people that come on these tours are here for the tour. They're staying in a hotel. They're eating at restaurants. They're here because of it, which is awesome. That's a really cool thing that we've learned over these last few years. So we don't want to provide an experience where people can't get in the river, they can't get out of the river, they have to wait in long lines. So we've just learned that over the years of what the experience is, and when people use the river, and how many people that we can put down the river to make that a quality experience for everybody that's paying to go on our tours or events.
And do you feel like you're there, or do you feel like there's still room on that river in the summertime?
Saturdays are getting up there. We do on a Saturday what we do cumulative of the rest of the week. There are some days if you hit a 88-degree day on a Saturday, we're getting there. I think once the fish pass happens and we have a little bit more user-friendly in and out right there at that halfway point, I think that'll create more. But there are a lot of days that we can experience more. There are a couple days, Saturdays in particular, that are getting close. Yes.
Peter,
All right, hold on just a second. I want to say, so we'll take questions and comments from the audience at the microphone over there. So if you want to get in this conversation, go to the mic. Steve. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I'd like to add that besides Troy's business, there's also the River Outfitters that work out of Medalley Park. They were down at Clinch Park, and then there's also another commercial outfit that works in now at Clinch Park. Jeff Bensley's, what's it called? Paddle TC, yeah. So, you know, and so it's a cumulative, you know, that like what Troy was saying, that on these hot summer days, that's when you're going to see the spike and the river being used the most. So that's, I just wanted to bring that. There's a couple other commercial outfitters that also operate on the lower part of the river.
Yeah. Go ahead, Troy.
So I'm going to add to that too. Our events are Paddle for Pints events. We don't ever do those on a Saturday, and I learned that in 2015, because that's when everybody wants to use the river. That we don't do any of those events on those days. We usually do them on Fridays or Sundays. We do a couple of Wednesdays, and those are usually from like the middle of June through the middle of August. Fridays and Sundays primarily. So just wanted to add to that because there aren't as many people on those days.
John.
Hi, this is John Hyam. I'm with the Drivers Area Paddle Club. And something, I'm sorry, I forgot your name, the conservation officer. Sure. But you said something that I thought was not true. It is my understanding that court cases have shown that paddlecraft are watercraft. And as a watercraft, you may not operate a watercraft while intoxicated. There are the same rules for operating a watercraft while intoxicated as there are for driving a car. So I've been in some other meetings where conservation officers and sheriff's officers absolutely refused to station themselves at accesses and give breathalyzer tests to people coming off that were obviously intoxicated. They said if they did that, the local prosecutor wouldn't prosecute. But it seems to me that we have a law in place. All we have to do is enforce it. And if we enforced it, then a lot of the behavior problems would go away.
That's Joe.
Yep. So you are correct that there is a law similar to a motor vehicle law that it is illegal to operate a motorized vessel under the influence of alcohol. But the law does specifically state motorized vessel. So individuals in kayaks or canoes do not fall under that law because they are not motorized. Furthermore, with tubes are not considered a vessel by definition under the state. So unfortunately, if we encounter someone who is intoxicated and they're using a non-motorized vessel, there is no avenue to remove them from the river just for sheerly operating a kayak or unmotorized canoe or kayak on the river.
All right, the things I've read have been in other states.
There are other states that they do have, they might list it as vessel, but state statute is motorized vessel for Michigan.
John, could you stay at the mic for a minute? You paddle this river as much as just about anybody,
yes.
Right? So is the consumption and abuse of alcohol the main issue you see in terms of what you want it to be and what your experience is?
To be honest, we avoid paddling. We're retired. So we avoid paddling the Boardman on weekends. And that's when most of the problem occurs.
How's the river on the weekdays?
Weekdays, it's fine. I mean, and we also enjoy putting in at the forks and coming down. And so, we come down and try to have as little impact as possible. When we see a fisherman, we hold up, we try to bunch up. So when we go by them one at a time, not one after another after another. There are things that paddlers can do to interact with fishermen that let us both enjoy the river. And as responsible users, we try and do that. We also do a lot of river cleanups. But I would say most of the problems probably come around when there are large numbers of people on weekends. There are some meetup groups from downstate that we kind of monitor what they do, and we've seen them put 70 people on the river at one time on the upper Boardman, which is obviously, I think, too many. But
it'd be a Saturday.
It'd be a Saturday or Sunday, right?
So Steve, to your point about the need for a recreational plan, are we mainly just talking about a problem 6 or 8 days in the summer out of the whole year?
There's also, there was a commercial request for a permit for 20 tubes a day, twice a day on Saturdays and Sundays. That would have started out on state, so the more, like I said, we're not there yet, but we need to be proactive and address it and kind of take a look at it and what kind of a river do we want, what kind of use do we want, and so we make sure that we're communicating that balance, what works and what doesn't work, and what do the people want. So that's really what the value of this here is right now, listening.
Are you?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Thomas Wurtson. For these purposes, I'll wear my hat as a board member of the Grand Traverse Conservation District. Somebody mentioned the concept of carrying capacity. I cannot emphasize how important that is. It's how we end up managing a common pool resource in, as Hank said, in a good way. Many of you, as you were going through college or something like that, may have studied what's called the tragedy of the commons. This was developed in 1852 by a man named Lloyd, and it was usurped in a bad way by a Garrett Hardin. Don't read that. Don't believe any of that junk. But in 2009, a lady named Eleanor Ostrom won the Nobel Prize in economics for elucidating how we can manage common pool resources. And she came up with these principles. Now, I don't have a slide. I don't expect you to write these all down if but it'll be on record, and I can discuss this with anybody who wants to. Here are her points. 8 principles for managing a commons. Number 1, define clear group boundaries. Number 2, match rules governing use of common goods to local needs and conditions. Number 3, ensure that those affected by the rules can participate in modifying the rules. Number 4, make sure the rulemaking rights of community members are respected by outside authorities. Number 5, develop a system carried out by community members for monitoring members' behavior. Number 6, use graduated sanctions for rule violators. Number 7, provide accessible low-cost means for dispute resolution. Number 8, build responsibility for government, for governing the common resources in nested tiers from the lowest level up to the entire interconnected systems. Now, these seem like kind of wise principles for me as a baseline for how to manage a resource in a common way, which in fact belongs to all of us. Now, we all have the ability to use this. We all have the ability to abuse this. And so we have to have some ways, rationally, to manage all of these. And so I'm proposing that we use these as a baseline for the decision making that we make as we develop the Boardman use in the future.
Where would you start?
Well, we have to begin by you can get online, you can see all sorts of different river systems where they've developed uses of common resources. And some of them are just Byzantine, they're arcane and they just don't work. So we have to begin by having, a group of people, a group of interested in people who want to develop a management, a recreational management program. We have to develop one that's unique to the Boardman River. It has to start by just, the long slogging process of community meetings, people who are involved in government in all levels, and until we can put together something that we can agree on. Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Melissa Wynn, and I live on the lower Boardman, in fact, live within the area of Fish Pass. I have a question about Paddle for Pints, because although I understand what the owner presented here today, I live there and I observe what goes on. And yes, your guides do oftentimes say to some of your paddlers, who generally are fairly respective of the river and of the community, you need to quit drinking because we're going to be on shore soon. And I've seen more than one of your guides tell people to put away the beers that they are openly drinking, oftentimes from some of the breweries along the river, along the Boardman Lake that they've picked up along the way. So there may be a policy, but I don't think it's being fully implemented as you expressed it.
How do you know they're his guides?
Because they're with his guides, they're Paddle for Pint people. They take out right below where I live and I talked with them. There's also very large barrels there for people to put their consumed alcohol cans and soda pop cans in. And there are people who come and literally haul away massive bags of cans from those locations after every weekend. A lot of people kind of make a side bit of money probably for their own pocket on it.
Well, let's let him answer.
Sure.
You've asked a question.
Yeah, and we don't allow anyone to bring alcohol on the event. What they get at a brewery is something that I legally can't control. We have expressed to the breweries of not, glass isn't allowed on the river anyways, any sort of glass. So anything that's being sold at the breweries, we have suggested not to sell them beers to take with them on the river, but that is something that we cannot control. But we have a policy in place, and that's all I can say with that.
Okay, so at some of the places that can, they do carry away those cans, and those are the ones that I usually see.
Yes.
The other thing I would mention is that your own Facebook page shows one of your guides with a can of beer sitting on the river below the Cass Street Bridge. Now, I realize it's a beer drinking event, and therefore you're going to want to encourage people to come on it and want to advertise beer. But your Facebook page advertising it right on the river seems to be in contrast to what you're saying. The other thing I would ask about is you mentioned 23 events this last year. It's true you've had 23 events this last year, but when I look back at last year's Facebook page and other listings, those are 23 days of which you had 4 waves a day of up to a maximum of 50 paddlers per wave. So that's 23 days of 200 potential paddlers per day, going in behind the library, taking out at Clinch Park, portaging in the area of Union Street. And I don't know, and I would ask you if the ticker was correct, but the ticker reported this week that when you got permission to use American Legion Park for your new access point, or not access, but exit point during Fish Pass, that you also received permission to not have the 20,000 paddlers that were requested, but to have 8,200 paddlers annually. Was the ticker correct in the fact that the city granted you the right to 8,200 paddlers annually?
Yeah, so I'll start with the Facebook picture. That is a beer that we collaboratively produce. Our guides and staff, we actually brew it with them. It is a beer that we do can with them in conjunction with the brewery. That is just for all the marketing, and we do that is why we do it. We don't make any money off the beer. It's just a cool thing we wanted to do locally.
So you did get permission for 8,200 paddlers this next year?
Yep, I'm getting, yes. So 20,000 may have been the what was, if we had sold out all the days, including the weekdays, which never happens. But yes, 8,200 is the amount of people we got approved for. for the year. Yes.
For 2020.
Yes.
Ma'am, can I ask you, so
Yes.
where do you live on the river? did you
I
say?
live between the Cass Street Bridge and the Union Dam.
Okay, so how does your expectation compare to what you experienced throughout the summer?
I would say most of the Paddle for Pints people are respectful users of the river. There aren't a whole lot of other non-affiliated with a commercial venture paddlers that we see. Most of them are coming through in the waves of up to 50 people. Most of them are Paddle for Pints. There are a few from a couple of other groups. We've seen some people try to float down on tubes rather unsuccessfully, and that doesn't seem to have continued. I'm not against the opportunity to use the river. I can't describe myself as either a fisher or a paddler. I do a minor little bit of each. But what I'm concerned about is the fact that there have been times that I've witnessed people who were out of control. The guides were trying to get them under control. I have witnessed people openly drinking on the river. Obviously, the type of beer that we're talking about that's produced and canned in some of the local breweries. I understand what you're saying is I can't come to the event with my 6-pack of Schlitz.
Correct.
But if I buy beer along the river on your trip from some of the breweries that can it, I know I'm dating myself with Schlitz. I'm also giving away a location or two, but I don't want to name local breweries that are along your tour because I've seen the cans. I know which ones can, which ones don't. But what you're saying is it's your belief you have no ability to stop someone who doesn't show up with their Schlitz, you can all laugh, but does pick up and buy 3 or 4 or 5 beer along the way in cans from the people that can and continue on your trip with those.
That is correct. We can encourage the breweries to reduce the amount, which we have reduced that over time. But yes, there's no way I can legally control that.
Yes.
Yes.
And I will say, I've heard your guides say to people, you need to finish those beers, you need to put them away, we're going to be on shore, you cannot openly carry on the land. So the guides are aware that there are beer being consumed on the river.
So you don't have a problem with the overall volume of traffic you're seeing on the river currently?
I do on certain days when, for example, in one of my ongoing questions to Fish Pass, those of you that have been at Fish Pass meetings have seen my photo. Over some of the heaviest part of use of the river by Paddle for Pints in the July dates, there can be as many as 85 kayaks or raid parked right down in our area because, and feel free to correct me if I'm misstating it, but the waves arrive, the first wave starts 10 something in the morning. They arrive at that Union Street area. They exit the river, they park their kayaks, they walk to breweries there. While they're off on their hour and a half walk to various breweries in that general area, another wave arrives, and that continues all day long into the early evening. And because of the Paddle for Pints regulation that if there's bad weather, they can actually push your tour off, I believe is at 3 hours.
Up to 3 hours.
Yes. So some of the tours that are supposed to finish by 5 or 6 in the afternoon actually extend into the evening. Not very often, but occasionally.
Yeah.
But it's a matter that some of the Fish Pass people that aren't local thought that all of those sorts of kayaks were literally portaging and moving on. That's not the case. They portage, they park for extended periods of time. So my concern isn't only about the use of the river, but the use of the public land around the river and how I've watched fishermen down below the current Union Street Dam not have any real space to fish because of the fact there's so many kayakers going in and out of the river in that area.
Yes.
So,
Okay, thank you.
you're welcome.
Patrick, let me just ask you, and I know we need to be clear, the Natural Rivers Program does not address anything happening on the lower Boardman River, but alcohol keeps coming up. Can a Natural Rivers Program say something specific about alcohol use on a river in Michigan?
I have no idea. I don't know. So as they stand now, there's nothing in the rule set either for public land or for private land. And to open the rule set would have to go back through the rule promulgation process, which is an arduous task at best. And so my inclination is that it's not the best avenue to be able to do that. And yeah, I'm going to leave it at that. I don't know that it's the best avenue because we also wouldn't necessarily have the best way to regulate that since this is a zoning program. It really is land-based and dimensional setbacks and things like that. So it might be kind of cumbersome.
Yeah.
But thank you for the variety of questions.
Hi, avid fisherman, Trout Unlimited member, Book Trout Coalition supporter, live on the Boardman River, stand-up paddleboard from the Forks down. So just so excited. I have a couple things I would like an answer to because I'm not really sure who we should go to. The side parking on the side of the roads, Garfield Bridge, let's say. All of the additional parking of people accessing at the bridge and parking and the crossing and the constant traffic is a danger not only to the people that are parking on the side of the river, they're trespassing. And how do we enforce that? And now, even on River Road, not even necessarily at a super great access point, there's cars literally every day in the summer, 8 or 9, both sides of the road, kayak trailers all over the place, even fly fishing trailers and that kind of thing, which I'm a big fly fisherman. I'm not sure how we enforce getting those vehicles off the side of the road. All of the congestion now down at Vitener of crossing between the two parking lots and children being dragged in kayaks by their parents across the road. I mean, the safety factor's killing me. So I'm not really sure, where do we go for enforcement? We have people trespass on our property all the time. So I'm not sure how we handle that as this gets to be busier and busier. And truly, from a safety point is where I'm coming from. I want people to get to the river and enjoy it, but then there's a safety matter. So I don't know where to go.
So, and I'll need a little help here because as I'm getting used to the area, I've only been in the region for about 6 months. So land ownership on those sections, who
So
owns?
at the bridge, let's say on Garfield Road. Oh, I'm sorry, yeah. Is that better? Sorry. So maybe you can help me out, Steve. Garfield Road Bridge.
Yeah,
On your
and
way
it's
to
at the
Mayfield.
railroad trestle, so it's actually MDOT rail right away. And so you've got, it's between the road commission road right away and MDOT rail right away, which is 50 feet from the center of the tracks, which overlaps with the road right away in that area where they're putting in. It's where the river flows from the north to the south.
Okay.
If you could click to the one image.
So-
Just
How do I advance this?
So I'll, I guess, do a little talking while they're trying to sort out technology.
well, it's gonna blow. Head for the exits.
So, I mean, ultimately, a road easement is designed for travel purposes. Again, if a local jurisdiction goes through a process to have an area, marked as a no parking area, then at that point, it could become something that is enforceable. Whose jurisdiction would that be within? Is that city property or is that county? Okay.
It's county.
So, I mean, from my understanding in these situations, the county would have to request a audit through, I believe, the state police to determine the use of it. And again, then it would have to be an area marked, especially since at that point it is public lands. If the ownership is the MDOT as well as the railroad, that, again, it'd have to be marked and zoned as a no parking area in order for anything to be enforced
To be
as far as for
enforceable.
people parking alongside the road.
Okay, because we've been told that we should create our own little form, and a lot of us do, that you put on cars that says your picture's been taken, this is your license plate. If it's found here again, you'll be reported and your car will be towed. That's what we were told is what to do by the sheriff's department.
I would not suggest touching other people's properties.
I agree,
And place those
But
things
that's what
on
the
vehicles.
sheriff's department told us to do to enforce it. So that's why I was asking you, because I
Yeah,
figured you
but
know.
I mean, a lot of those issues, and again, I don't know the full process and, marking those areas as no parking areas, but, in many times there's not a avenue to create a solution to the mechanism from what you're talking about. And again, it can be frustrating, but, it might not be something that, could be marked as a no parking area.
No, a car can't be on the side of the road unless it's either non-motorized. I mean, you can't just park a car and walk away on the side of the road. That's not what that easement is for, correct? You can't just leave it.
The easement's designed for travel purposes, again, and how it is utilized, again, on state land. If you're driving along a county road or a state forest 2 track, you're allowed to stop, alongside those county roads or state land. Again, it would have to be zoned as an area for no parking.
So
Unless
who would,
otherwise marked.
go ahead.
Unless otherwise marked.
So how do we go about getting that?
Do you know anybody at the road commission?
I do, but we can't seem to get, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's the best place to start, Liz, would be with the road commission and get that from a safety standpoint, designated as no parking area. Sorry.
So we have sort of a comment here. Somebody's wondering about experiences on the Ottaway River. Does Charlie want to come up? Okay. Well, while he's getting there, the Ottaway deals with these same issues. We were when we had spoken to a paddling commercial operator over there who did not take customers online because he wanted a chance to pre-screen them over the phone. Is there anything else to be learned from what's happening on the Ottaway with their management? Steve, do you know?
No, I mean, that's part of what we would be looking into to see what lessons learned, on other area rivers and as far as management. But each river is unique in its ownership and use.
Charlie?
Hi, Charlie Weaver. I'd like to relate some of my experiences. I was a river guide on the Ottaway River for 30 years. And I remember Saturdays just detesting being on the river with the canoes that were a lot of drunks with a lot of obnoxious behavior, et cetera. Well, what happened back, I think sometime in the 90s, early 2000s, the canoe liveries in Grayling got together and they formed an agreement that they would limit the amount of beverages, alcohol beverages in the canoe. I believe it was to 6 per person or 6 per boat. And that really cleaned things up. It just made things a whole lot better. That's one thing I offer as a possible solution to some of the problems we're talking. The other thing I would relate to is for many years I canoed the boundary waters up in Minnesota and Ontario. And I recall back in the 70s when the Forest Service started putting a limit on the number of canoes that could be launched at any particular access area. And there was a lot of, local disagreement at first, especially the outfitters and stuff. But over the years, that really worked out. It made the wilderness a much, much better experience. And so I just want to throw that out there for consideration.
You had to get a permit to launch a boat.
Correct. Right. You had to have a permit. Yep.
To launch at a national access site. National Forest access.
National Forest, right. Superior National Forest, right.
There's similar permit systems in place, whether it be the Pine. Currently, the state does not have a permit system that would limit the number of people that are utilizing the access sites. With the recreational passport, anyone can come in and utilize them. And again, so that limitation would only hold to the U.S. Forest Service access sites, and again, would not have any type of limiting factors onto anyone launching from private property as well.
I guided on the Pere Marquette River too, but just the spring and fall when there weren't many canoeists, and that was also Forest Service things.
Yes.
But the question then, could the state, if they wanted to, put that kind of limitation at their access sites?
That would be something within our policy. Much above my pay grade before we were to limit anything like that. Again, access sites, by their nature and size, do some limiting. But again, as one member from the audience had mentioned, people will utilize the sites and park in other areas. I myself paddle and I fish, and at times, depending on the different stretches or rivers that I utilize, sometimes I have to have a friend drop me off because I can't utilize those. And again, so to limit potentially the number of people accessing, again, the surface of the waterway is held in public trust for all visitors and all residents of the state to use. To limit it to allow, a set number, again, does take away everyone's right to enjoy that waterway as well.
Right, but it can increase the amount of enjoyment for each user if there are certain regulations in place, which is sort of, to me, the basis of government and regulations. I'll throw out one more thing that the liveries did on the Asable as well, is they started spending more time with their people before they got into their canoes or kayaks on etiquette, river etiquette, and how to better get along with the anglers that were out there, how to deal with that, and it just made a much more pleasant experience. So.
Joe, can you clarify, when I've been on the Pine in my own boat, I thought I had to have my permit showing, and if I did not, then a federal conservation officer could write me a ticket for being on the river without a permit.
That permit is solely to use the federal U.S. Forest Service access sites. If you use a state land access site or you launch on private property, you're not required to have that permit. Again, surface of the waterway is held in public trust for all to use.
Okay. And could you, the statement, it's held in public trust for all to use, when earlier someone recited a list of ideas about common use, do you think those concepts that were presented as potentially helpful conflict with what's currently in state law? If we start having, for instance, graduated sanctions for people who violate certain standards that are put in place?
Again, trying to determine what is, a acceptable number of use or quotas. Again, the river system is an extremely long, stretch of river. And again, there are concentrated areas of use. So to try to quantify by saying, there can only be, 100 users on a stretch of river, maybe someone that is fly fishing or going to just work a small section of a river might paddle upstream and only go 100 yards or 200 yards at any one given time and then come right back. And so again, you have different areas, and to try to stretch it out and say that only so many users can use a stretch of river, that's difficult. That would be saying that only a certain number of motor vehicles can drive on a highway. I spent 2.5 years in Detroit prior to transferring back north. Came from Alpena, Montmorency, Presqu'île, Northwest Michigan. We have the Thunder Bay River. I wish that we would limit the number of people that we have on the highways. It would have made my commute a whole lot more enjoyable. But there's again certain things. These are modes of transit, modes of enjoyment. And one of the things we have to remember is that what is recreation and what is enjoyment for one user might be completely different for other users. And that's where we have to, have a little bit of that compassion for everyone, even if it doesn't meet your ideal of enjoyment. For me, I like paddling, and I like being an active paddler. So the thought of relaxing on a tube floating down a stretch of river at that slower speed would drive me absolutely crazy. So tubes aren't my cup of tea. I mean, for me, it's, a kayak, or I grew up in Grayling, and my dad worked at Ray's Canoe Livery for the gentleman that is over from Grayling. So he probably gave many of those speeches on river etiquette. And, again, times are changing. What is acceptable in public has changed dramatically. If you look at what was acceptable on the radio or the TV 5 years ago or 10 years ago, those things have dramatically changed. There's lots of times I'm riding in the truck with my son, and he's like, "Dad, that song's got bad words." And that's commercial radio. Some of our local stations.
Listen to public radio.
I do listen to that. And I support it too. So, it's one of those that we do have to remember that, again, just because we might not find what other people are doing as enjoyable, that we can't, solely say, well, this is how I enjoy the river, and this is the only way it should be enjoyed. We have to remember that other people might not agree with us. Our own fishing groups have different views. Some fishing groups believe it's catch and release only, where some people are looking to catch something to eat. Or again, some anglers prefer fly fishing, or prefer, all, non-natural baits. Again, we have different stretches that have different regulations. So again, we have to remember that just because we might not see the enjoyment of a certain aspect or a certain recreational activity occurring, that other people might have the same view as what we find enjoyable.
Well, Patrick, let me ask, the Natural Rivers Plan invites someone to try and figure out what the carrying capacity is. Joe's suggesting that would be very difficult, if not impossible, to sort of try and decide between all these competing uses. So what would one do if they wanted to carry on the work that was started in the 70s?
And before diving into that, I should clarify that the carrying capacity clause is put in there specifically as something to determine the allowability of expansion of commercial activity, not private activity. It doesn't limit any one of you from taking a canoe up there, no matter what the carrying capacity would be determined. So the process would be to assemble a group of people from the community, including the DNR and other regulatory agencies, and start to have the conversation, because there is no right answer. The answer is the balance that everyone can accept, which goes back to the 8 values that were presented earlier. And one of the things that I liked about the 8 values was that self-regulation. It's that if you see someone behaving outside of your expectation of acceptable behavior, we share in the responsibility of steering them towards the appropriate behavior, not calling Joe. So I think that, a rec plan to determine carrying capacity would be a tough task to try and strike the balance. And again, that's for commercial use. Because if we had a tally of the number of dollars that are spent trying to recruit more anglers and hunters, we could pay for the plan. Because we're in a situation where we find less people wanting to be outside to recreate. And so I think the last thing the Natural Rivers program would want to do would be to limit people wanting to come enjoy natural resources.
Okay, we're collecting questions. You can step to the mic if you want, or if you want to write something on a card, you can. Let me just get through a few of these. This says, what do you know about riparian rights, specifically above the Forks Landing? Steve?
Well, riparian rights, that's private property, obviously. But upstream of Forks is primarily state-owned. And so, the state owns that land. You do have sections of private on both branches, north and south branches, but a majority of the frontage on those two branches is state frontage. Now, if it's private, then you have trespass issues, but otherwise, I'm not exactly clear on what they mean by riparian zone. Riparian rights. Go ahead, Joe.
So, and again, riparian ownership goes to the bottomlands of a body of water. Again, so if we're talking about a river, and again, for this instance, it's a straight river. Lots of times rivers are utilized as boundaries between different ownerships. So one owner might own the east side, the other owner owns the west side. They control the rights to the lands, the highland above the ordinary high water mark, as well as the bottomlands. And in those bottomlands, they control hunting and trapping rights. But individuals are still allowed to float the river and fish. They're allowed to wade in the river below the ordinary high water mark. At times, anglers wading or or in a canoe, they can exit the river if there is a hazard, whether it be a log across the river, or if they're wading, there's a deep hole that they can't walk through. They can exit the river within the defined banks, go onto the private property, and then go back into the water in, again, as quick as possible. They don't have a right to walk, extended distances across that private property, but the riparian ownership goes to the lands above the ordinary high water mark and controlling the hunting and trapping rights to that section of river. Again, law reads that, again, the public has the right to the surface of the waterways for means of navigating, for swimming, bathing, fishing. But again, the riparian ownership comes to who has permission to come onto the lands above the ordinary high water mark and who hunts and traps the lands.
What about taking out the hazard yourself?
Below the ordinary high water mark needs a permit from the former DEQ Eagle, Environment, Great Lakes and Energy. Below the ordinary high water mark. Above the ordinary high water mark, if you have a log that's above the ordinary high water mark, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Patrick, as well, but that can be cut out. But removal below the ordinary high water mark, because of its habitat value, because of its resource value, needs a permit to be removed, or on the reverse side, to put in as well. So in other words, if you wanted to add habitat wood, it's considered fill, and it would have to be added. Is that
not making a path through it to allow passage of that?
Again, if it is above the ordinary high water mark, you have to have the permission of the landowner. And you also have to have the permission of the landowner if you do not own that land.
Yeah, from the Natural Rivers Program, I take it a little bit more lenient than that, and I would say that a very small portion, typical of appropriate for watercraft, typical of the area, that you could open a section that big to make sure you get through if the river's going to be, pushing you into a log jam or something. There's a method called the clean and open method, which sort of outlines how to do it in a manner that leaves the majority of the log jam for all the functions it provides to the river and the ecosystem, but also, grab the trash while you're moving a couple logs and do it that way. If the tree is still connected to the private property, it's still the private property's owner. They still own that tree, so you would need their authorization. And most times, if there's a jam that's bad, I ask you to take a picture of it and send it to me, and then tell me what you're going to do, so that when someone calls to complain, we've had a dialogue about it beforehand.
All right, let me fire through some more questions here. So this is from Lois Gold. What's that?
Do we need to change these batteries?
We're not going to change the batteries unless the guys in the back room come out and tell me we need to. We're going to go to about 7:30. So if we can get through 15 more minutes on the battery power we have, that'll be good. So this is Lois Goldstein, the outings chair of the Traverse Area Paddle Club. She says, I'm concerned about potential use of Beitner Rapids. Too many 911 calls and busted up boats left behind. Do outfitters want to utilize those accesses too? Troy, could you see yourself going up there? Any of your...
We have never launched anybody. We've never launched anybody past Hall Park for any of the tours that I've ever done. We've never launched anything.
Could you see, just hold on, could you see yourself doing it? Do you have an interest in expanding your business?
No, we don't have an interest. The lake, all of our tours are all guided. Every single one of them that we put out there has a guide. The lake, the Boardman Lake is it's for the novice beginner paddler recreation that just wants to get out there to be outdoors is not the clientele that we have.
Steve?
And there is, the River Outfitters, they do have a subsidiary called Boardman Rapids, and they do give tours at the permission of Grand Traverse County to use their Beitner launch to paddle down through there, but take tours down through there. But they quickly found out that after they put in one tour, and it was a family, if you can address this, but it was a family that the father got ahead of the son, and the son tipped over. The father waited when the son didn't show up, and then got concerned, went back, found the tipped over kayak, and called 911. In the meantime, the kid had gotten out, walked back up to the landing, and searchers were looking up and down the river for him, and he was back at the car. So and from that point on, I think, and again, you can talk to this, Eric, speak to this, but they now have a guide go with each one of those tours, because the Boardman, the Keystone Rapids are dangerous, flat out.
You want to comment on this, Eric?
Yes, I would. Thank you, Steve. My name's Eric Clone. I'm here representing not only myself, but Tawny Hammond and Tree Sturman from the River Rapids. And my company is called Life Motive Adventures. I was brought on board to the river to work as a third component to the collective of those three to offer safe, guided experiences on the rapids. Just as the gentleman, Charlie, was it? Mentioned, we do spend an extensive amount of time before even getting into the water. I do a full tutorial on what to do when they fall out of their boat, and how to safely navigate the rapids when swimming. High water, our rapids can go up to a class 2, which when it comes to swift water is still swift water. It is still dangerous. However, it is not the typical class 3 or greater that you'll see in Tennessee, Virginia, Colorado, etc. We're giving guided experiences on the rapid sections. I am one of them. I'm Wilderness Medical Associate certified as a first responder and EMT. All of our guides that we'll be guiding in the future will be Wilderness First Aid certified and Swiftwater Rescue certified. We're meeting a high credential standards to navigate that section of river, even though in the greater scheme of things, there is much more dangerous water out there that is effectively guided in a commercial aspect. So we're looking to do this in a very successful and safe manner, all along the while offering interpretive lessons as well, because there's a rich history recently with the revitalization of the river through the removal of the dams. We give a very good instructional as to what's happening as the ecology is healing and mending itself and recovering from over 100 years of being restricted. We also give some limited history, but we're learning and hopefully going to gain more knowledge to teach the Native American history and how Native Americans utilize the river, as well as the history between point A and point B, is how the history of the river played an important role in the development of Traverse City through the dams and the logging that ensued during that era. So we are providing a very comprehensive picture of what Traverse City is all about through guiding people on the river. Now that is just a section of the rapids. There, as you can see on the map, much more of this river that we are very interested in on a commercial aspect. And if I may continue, does that clarify the rapid section? Of any questions? Anybody have any other questions?
Did someone want to, someone started last
Lois?
summer, I think. Is that you, Lois? Go ahead.
What was your question, Lois?
Last summer, I noticed that I'm not sure if it was your organization or someone else put guarantees down that
Yes, that I was on that one as well as Steve.
members of the Traverse Area Paddle Club hosted a trip. Took only people who were extremely experienced, had row bags with everybody, had helmets.
Yep.
And stopped after every single drop. I had scouted that river before we went. And I remember I met a woman who was walking up from the river the night before, and I said, was there anybody on the river? And she said, no, but I'm doing it tomorrow. I said, do you have the proper equipment? She said, oh yeah, I have flip-flops.
Yeah.
I'm really concerned because when people see, I have a teacher voice. Oh,
Yeah, but he's
okay.
running a live Facebook feed.
Okay. I'm concerned because throughout the summer, I saw busted up boats there.
Right.
I've had former students whose parents called me and said, can you find his backpack? He went through Beitner Rapids. I'm really, really concerned that the public will be going down there. I'm also really concerned because the access at Beitner is very small. And when people, if you bring a group, and I don't know how big your groups are, there's only space for maybe 15 cars.
We adhere to ACA standards of 5 to 1.
5 to 1.
Guide.
Does that mean you're only taking 5 people?
We can take over 5, but for every 5, we have, if they go over 5, we have to add another guide. So if we
I'm
go to
talking
6,
about the parking.
the parking is, there's never a vehicle that stays there. It's a drop off and
I see.
departure. Yep.
All right, let's leave that there. Thank
Okay.
you.
I'm done.
So as we kind of wind down here, Steve, I want to ask you, you have, at our last forum and tonight, you've talked about a recreational plan. There's obviously plenty that needs to be worked through. How does that start? Where does that start? What is the next step?
Well, the next step would be to get the funds to be able to put together a scoping document, which would identify all the partners that need to be involved, all the organizations, and actually then you come out with an RFP from that project, or from that, that would then hire a firm to put together a management plan. Now, listening again, that's what I wanted to hear from, listen to Lieutenant Molnar here say that we cannot restrict access besides public access, commercial access on those public launches. Then then we'd be looking at something different, and it would also provide an opportunity in the end of maybe allowing some more commercial activity, but it has to be balanced with the fishermen, the use of the river, because and that's right now there's no control right there of any kind of, like I said, that young man that was fishing, fly fishing at the Sheck's Trail Camp and just kept getting interrupted. So there has to be some kind of a balance. Plus, the cutting out of the wood. We work closely with Sid Melody from Ranch Rudolph to make sure that the river is open to reasonable navigation. And so we need to just all come together on a plan that we can all agree on and move forward with, as far as from not only from a local and visitor standpoint, but also commercial.
So Patrick, you mentioned that I think the Little Manistee has a recreational plan?
The Upper Manistee.
The Upper Manistee. What does that do?
It sort of has outlines the anticipated expansion of use and looks at what the opportunities are and sort of customizes the recreation opportunities to the amenities. And then if there is a blatant absence of an amenity, then we can work to put that in. So for example, we worked with a nonprofit on the Manistee who came to us and said, we really need a boat slide here for drift boats to get out. But it wasn't in the rec plan. But it's a new parcel that the state has acquired, which divides a really long float into more of a manageable float time. So we worked to regulate how close they could park to the river and what the boat slide structure would be. So it really, it pumps the brakes on sort of the rampant development of recreation features and amenities to support the recreation.
So what, did it come out of problems in the community? How did it get there?
Both, and I think that some of this really originated with growing user conflicts, and as a method to sort of nip it in the bud, they said, let's develop this plan. So there are things outlined that should be done in that plan that still have yet to be built. For example, an equestrian crossing. So it was sort of proactive to avoid user conflict, but it's probably 25, 30 years old now.
No.
I do need to dive into a different topic really quickly. And I am not bringing negative energy. And I appreciate the opportunity to hypothetically smudge. One thing that I find interesting, though, is that everybody that we've heard from is eager to have some sort of assistance in regulating and managing. But you all just witnessed me learn that there's commercial activity in the Natural Rivers District that is regulated. So if we can't prop up and adhere to the existing plans, what's a new one going to do?
Yeah. Actually, that points to my question to you, Patrick.
Go.
Yeah. I actually, the whole reason I came here in the first place wasn't about the rapids. It was that I wanted to ask you, Patrick, being a commercial outfit and a growing one, we're revising our mission statement to become the best stewards and to become the authorities, the commercial authority on the Boardman River for paddling sports. We would love to work hand in hand with the DNR, but we don't know what process really, because the process is really ambiguous as to how to go about being the steward and the legal commercial outfit that guides from below Brown Bridge all the way to the bay. And we would like to help you assess the numbers quotient, what is the carrying capacity, and what are the credentials that we need to meet, such as safety, certified interpretation, teaching ethics to not only our guests, but like I did several times last year with customers, I would see private users without PFDs navigating the rapids, and I would strongly encourage them to at least put their PFD on. And I got talked back to a lot of times, but safety is a number one concern of ours. And we would love to know, how can we work hand in hand with the DNR to become that authority? I feel we're really jumping through what we can do on our part with Wilderness Medical Associates, American Canoe Association, Swiftwater Training Rescues, and Certified National Interpretive Studies. So,
well, the first thing you could do, honestly, is stop leading the tours until that's solved, because otherwise it's an erosion of the integrity of the plan itself that calls for the carrying capacity. So then the study would be like, what we cannot do is say, since you were first, you are the certified, because you did it in violation of the rules. And so what I would like to see is that activity end.
We didn't know that there wasn't, there,
I met with Tawny
okay.
quite a bit.
And I was brought in late in the summer, so.
So that
what
would be
happened
my
previous?
request, is that the activity stop. And then the idea of a carrying capacity and the rec plan is one that I don't have the capacity to lead. So if Steve at the district wants to lead it and the community wants to lead it, I can absolutely participate. We do have rec planners, but you know, the story of the DNR's funding is constantly a negative one. So we went from four full-time Natural Rivers staff to now we have the equivalent of about 1.5. So taking on new things like this will be difficult at this time. One thing that all of you could do is buy a fishing license or a hunting license, whether you fish or hunt or not. That's what pays to protect this resource.
Okay. Being that we are a commercial operation and do need to have revenue, what can you recommend that we can do to continue business and not go bankrupt and still allow visitors to Traverse City to have an enjoyable, safe experience on the Boardman River this year?
Stay downstream of Hammond-Hartman Bridge line, the line between the Hammond-Hartman, because then you're outside of the Natural Rivers District and I can't regulate it.
So anything from below Brown Bridge?
Yep. No, from upstream down to Hammond-Hartman, the hypothetical line between those two roads, that's where the Natural Rivers District stops. So downstream of that is not regulated for commercial activity.
So due to the fish pass, the commercial operations are endangered and the river upstream is restricted. So commercial operations such as Troy's and ours are in danger?
I don't have any regulatory authority downstream of the hypothetical line where the Hammond-Hartman connection would be.
Absolutely, we are.
And it kind of painted into a corner. But anyways, we would love to be cooperative and work so that we can make this, set the guidelines, set the standards.
And then one of the things, if expansion of commercial activity would be allowable, we would have to have a strategy to make it equitable in competition for who gets that expansion.
Can you repeat what she's saying?
Yeah, the question was, what's the due date for the analysis to be able to operate commercial activity? Well, the plan was written in 1976. But that also means the plan was in place when the commercial activity began.
Does the plan prohibit commercial activity?
Expansion of commercial activity. It's currently capped at 50 boats a day, and the rights to those boats are to Ranch Rudolph, who had that prior to Natural Rivers being implemented.
Okay, let's invite someone from the Grand Traverse County Road Commission is here and wants to speak to the earlier conversation.
Yeah, is this on? All right. Steve, you asked? I'm here, buddy. Mark McKellar, Grand Traverse County Road Commission Commissioner. I'm serving my 10th year, Chuck. It's been a long time. So a couple things I want to address. Beitner Canoe Landing. Many of you have heard about some of the east-west corridor conversation we've had for the last 2 years, and we're already in implementation stages on a lot of that. And at the intersection of Keystone and River Road, we have a roundabout scheduled. When that roundabout goes in, that's going to have a tremendous impact on the Beitner Canoe Landing. Okay, so what we're talking about, the Road Commission, is begin the dialogue with the county about a relocation of that crossing so that it's not on east and west sides of the road. That basically it's all on the west side of the road. But there's going to be quite a bit of conversation because of the rapids and everything, they're launching off spot. What we realize as a road commission, because part of our job is serving the community in a safe way, that bridge congestion with that parking lot on both sides of the road is a recipe for disaster. When it was built, folks, it served its purpose, but today it's outside of the scope of serving its purpose. So we're going to be looking at that. So, but that's going to probably be between 2 and 3, 4 years out.
I have an
Okay?
answer.
All right, there you go. So the other is a little education about right-of-way. The Grand Traverse County Road Commission has right-of-ways on the roads in Grand Traverse County. Right-of-way from whom? The private property owners. We granted them permission to put the road through for the common good. In that right-of-way, we also manage utilities. But the County Road Commission does not own that land. And that is not public land. That is the owner's land along the roadway. When you come across a county bridge, there are 4 corners to that bridge. All 4 corners are private land. It's not permissible to park on the road and access the river at that park or that bridge. That is not a public property. And people are mistaken. They think it is. What I'd tell you is this. In the last 9 years, I sat in there and had the residents of a community, when we were ready to abandon a road, they go through a legal proceeding and suing us, not nasty suit, but they sue us for the right to have the road back completely in their domain. And we grant it. And then there's no right-of-way anymore for the road or utilities or anything. Happens all the time. Now, River Road, there are 2 bridges. People will park along there. They might have a right to park temporarily along the road. But once they step into that right-of-way, they're stepping on private property. If you couple that with MDOT's rail, that rail right-of-way is highly restricted, and you're not permitted to be on it. And they have it posted all along River Road. The last couple of years, they put up several signs, dozens of signs up and down there. So what I'd tell you is, historically, in Michigan, if there's a bridge, when we had low population, we didn't have high-intensity recreation with the kayaks and everything, people would access it and nobody would care. But things have changed. You got more traffic on our roads. You got people accessing points because of the pressure in the parking lots because they're at capacity. And you got people that can afford a $200 kayak like no tomorrow. So what you're having is a lot of people getting into the other areas. So I have talked to several people, and they are not aware of that. In Michigan, that is the rules, and that is the law. And there are going to be court cases on it for sure in the future as it's challenged. But it's dangerous. And as my wife pointed out earlier, we literally have seen people put their kid in the kayak and drag them across or along the edge of the road. I as a parent, grandparent, no way. So but I'd answer any questions later off the record. But thank you for your time.
Thanks.
All right.
All right. Question. Okay.
Yeah.
My name is Kathy Tuckerman. I'm actually a neighbor of Melissa, and I'll second everything that she said. Most of the paddlers are very good.
Step closer to the
Okay.
microphone.
Most of the paddlers are very good, but I do have a concern on the numbers because they're recreational and alcohol does not always mix. And I'll give a perfect example. I can look out my window and see the paddlers, and one day there was a gentleman who fell out at and it was with a group. I don't know if it was yours, sir. It may have been a different one, but he fell out of his kayak 3 times. And no one was really helping him. There wasn't anyone there to help him. I was about to call 911. So I just have a concern on making sure that we do control the alcohol consumption on the river because it's a problem. Thank you.
Thanks.
Keep coming. So Dan Novak, I have a question. I see 100+ people here, and maybe for a panel, at least for me, I see 3 groups: anglers, boaters, kayakers, canoers, and property owners. Might be interesting to know, and you might do that. I am both owner and kayaker I'm not an angler, but it may be interesting to know who represents what group. Like, do we have all paddlers here? There's property owners, just for gauging what the community is trying to really learn. And the question that I have for the panel is,
Well, hold on, let's do it. It's a great idea. Who's here primarily because you're a property owner? Who's here primarily because you're an angler? Who's here primarily because you like to paddle?
amazing.
Mostly paddlers.
I'm really excited about that.
Okay, go ahead with your question.
Question that I have for the panel is to clarify commercial activity on the upper end. So let's imagine that I set up a Facebook page and I invite all my friends. There's no money exchange and there's 20 of us paddling upper stream of Boardman. Is that commercial activity or not? Or let's imagine we have a Grand Traverse or Traverse City Paddler Club, which is nonprofit. And they organize 50 people. Bus comes up there, nobody pays any money, but there's 50 people now going down the river. I'm assuming that's also non-commercial activity. Am I correct on those two?
That's correct, yep.
Okay, thanks for clarifying.
So one other thing though, is if they're using a state launch, and I wrote down the first, is it 20? For a special use permit, if you're over 20 people, you have to register your event with the state of Michigan, and is like $150 permit or something. I don't know exactly what it is, but it would be the same for like a trail ride and things like that. You have to have a special use permit.
If you're using a state launch site.
At Brown Bridge, you have to get a single-use permit from the city clerk's office to use Brown Bridge launch, and that'll city property, correct?
So if you have a private property.
Pardon?
Commercial.
No, it just, yeah, I mean, so let's say somebody wants to take a group out, fly fishing, they just do go to the city clerk's office and get a permit, and they have different levels of permit. Frank, do you want to speak to that? I mean, there's a low intense and a high intense, or high impact, low impact and high impact. That's the way they look at it and judge it. Right.
So if you make a deal with Ranch Rudolph and bring us of friends, there is no authority over launching people in the river.
Ranch Rudolph is a commercial entity. If you're paying them money,
No.
and they are regulated.
Right, but if it's a Facebook or a nonprofit or none of that, so you don't pay any money, that's just.
You'd have to get their
That's
permission.
correct. Yeah. No, you're right.
Okay, thank you.
Rick.
Hi, Rick Buckhalter. I want to address a court case I read last Sunday that I've never seen before in my life. It was a Michigan Supreme Court case, I believe, but addressed the public trust doctrine, which goes back to when the Northwest Territories were bought from Virginia way back when, and that's water doctrine, and it says that everybody has equal use to lakes and rivers as long as it can float a log. And what this court case did, and I believe it was a Michigan Supreme Court case, did for the first time ever, I've never seen it before, is it challenged that. And what they were saying was, if there is a standard of use that the general population of an area of a lake or river accept as being wanted, liked, and normal, then they have the right to go to court and challenge it if an outside party or a new party comes in with an action or behavior that is objectionable. And what that translates to, it would now allow municipalities to create a standard for a section of lake or river that is within their bounds. And if you had, let's say, the Boardman River, which has several townships up and down the length of it, they could have a different standard of use that was acceptable for each one. And that is a game changer. I've never heard that before, but that changes everything. And unfortunately, I can't remember the citation. I'll look it up after seeing the interest of all these people. But that would let, let's say, Garfield Township, or one of the townships upstream where the river changes, let's say, and they would have a standard of use that's more acceptable to Township A than Township B. So if you were an outfitter and wanted to have
party animals, and that's acceptable in Garfield Township, they would have legislation where that's acceptable, and they would permit the outfitters to do that there. You go upriver, where it's more remote, more fly fishing, rustic, if you will, and townships up there could create their own standard because the people that live in that area have a different view on what the river means to them and what uses are acceptable.
Okay, let's see if anyone knows what you're talking about.
I doubt it. I'd never heard this before.
Any comment from the panel?
I would be interested to see how that would, jibe with the Natural Rivers Program, which is a locally zoned, enforced program. I mean,
Yeah, to what Steve references of the local zoning for the Natural Rivers Program is for private lands only. So not things that are for the broader public use. Those get classified as a publicly provided facility or a utility. So someone doing an in-stream habitat project, even though it may be on private land, it's deemed for the benefit of the broader user community. So there are many townships that are locally zoned for the building setback, for example, that is only on private land.
All right, are you waiting to? All right, let's do one more question from the microphone. Two, okay, we'll do two.
Mitch Treadwell. I love paddling and also fishing, but lately I've been doing a lot more paddling. I would have paddled here except for the lake is frozen. I did already paddle on the Boardman River twice this week. But I am curious what you would recommend as tactics to balance the competing interests of kayakers or other paddlers and fishermen who both have rights to use a given stretch of the river, yet we do have conflicts, especially in areas where one feels they have, for one reason or another, more rights. There are stretches of creeks or rivers that I wouldn't paddle just because I recognize that they are popular for, say, trout anglers, and I wouldn't want to get in the way of somebody's fly fishing. Or there are sections like the lower Platte River that I would not plan on fishing in the summer just because there's way too many boats. But along much of the Boardman River, there are pretty split uses between people fishing and people paddling, and conflicts inevitably emerge. I can be on the lower Boardman in October and have to dodge right to left, paddling down the river just because there's dozens of people fishing. Or if I'm trying to fish, I have to try to position myself in a way so that I have access to a hole without somebody kayaking under or over my line.
I think it's clear. Anyone want to tackle that?
but again, I think it comes to, go ahead, Troy.
I mean, I was just going to add, just because we've also run into this issue as well. And so our tours, we launch, we don't want to launch obviously too early. We don't want to end too late. Our tours around the river between the hours of about noon and 7:30. We do see towards the end of the season that time we do take those end tours and remove them because of the anglers. We try to work around them, but yeah, we definitely see that conflict as well and try to solve that also.
And that's what I was going to mention, is that self-policing, that's etiquette, and I think that's what it comes down to. It's up to each individual, person and paddler and angler as to how they position themselves and react to the other recreational users. So it comes down to etiquette.
All right, one more from the microphone.
There's one more guy behind
we
me.
have two. Oh, you're waiting also. Okay.
When Fred gets up, there's someone else.
Kent Anderson. I'd like to suggest that the real issue is the commercial uses. It's not the local paddlers and the people that go out for recreational use. It's the commercialization and commoditization of public resources. And I applaud Troy Daly. I'm a free market guy. I love entrepreneurs that come up with ideas to go out and make money, provide experiences. But you can exceed the capacity of things to handle it. I was a canoe instructor, a Boy Scout camp director. I've led wilderness canoe trips on the Boundary Waters and Eagle Scouts. And if they had let anybody with a commercial idea go into the Boundary Waters with unlimited numbers of people, it would not exist the way it does today. So it seems kind of crazy to me that we're licensing and permitting fishermen, hunters. We're not doing anything about kayaks or canoes. We don't require permits. We don't require licenses. The group that's missing here is the city. Most of the activity that we run into is on the lower Boardman. We have a small sailboat. We put it in at the boat ramp at Hall Park. And whenever we go there on a Saturday or Sunday, we get hit with a wave of kayakers. And it takes 10 or 15 minutes for us to put our boat in. We can't go in until they clear. And when we come back in, we can't take our boat out until they clear. Same thing with the fishermen. That boat ramp was not designed for kayakers. It was designed to put boats in the water. So if we've got this new gig economy experience with kayakers, somebody needs to be thinking about a better way to handle the volume we've got. You don't need a boat ramp to put a kayak in. You can put it in on a dock. So if the outfitters are willing to help work with the city and put in the infrastructure to handle the number of people that are there, go for it. But the city ought to be controlling the number of people. That we're a tourist destination. We depend on tourism, but we're already reaching capacity. You know, we got all these groups, DDA, the Chamber, Traverse City Tourism, the city staff promoting tourism. Try going out US 31 North in July, 4, 5, 6 o'clock. The traffic is backed up all the way to 3 Mile, all the way out to Acme. You're eventually going to run into a situation where you're saturating the ability of the resource to handle it. So unless you get ahead of it and you start trying to figure out ways to control it, regulate it, limit it, you're eventually going to get to a point where it's all going to crash.
Thank you.
This thing's is it working? So it's my name's Norman Fred. I am the founder of Boardman River Clean Sweep. I'm also a member of Trout Unlimited and the Brook Trout Coalition, which I'm very proud of. So I do river cleanups. We started doing river cleanups a long time ago, but we've been doing it as in an organized way for about 15 years. And I see a lot of people. Raise your hand if you've been on a cleanup or if you do cleanups on your own. Right, okay. You see, now look at this. Turn around the people in the front. Look at this. So this is why the next statement I make is so astounding. When we first started doing this, we would take out dumpsters of trash. And now we can't cover the bottom of one dumpster with trash because the river is extremely clean, especially up from the forks to Hall Park is very, very clean. However, from Hall Park down, where his people are, the river is a real mess, but it's cleaner than it was when we first started cleaning. And it's not because of him. It actually got cleaner when he arrived. And we didn't understand that. We thought that Paddle for Pints was going to be a disaster for us. But actually, the river has gotten better. And we have found that it's not paddlers that leave the trash along the river. The trash we found along the river upstream is there by accident. We find wallets, shoes, clothing, beer, unopened beer cans. People don't throw that stuff away. That's lost accidentally. What we find downtown is we find sleeping bags. we find tents. We find whiskey bottles. These are things that are left by homeless people. They're left by some fishermen, not all, but some type of fishermen are not real responsible people, and also tourists. And so I don't think we should point our criticism at Troy or at the commercial outfitters. I think we need to put more trash cans. When we first started, there were no trash cans along the river, and we got the city. We lobbied the city for more trash cans, and we got them, and the river got cleaner. We got toilets upstream, and the river got cleaner. So when you build the new roundabout, where's Mr. McKellar?
Back over there.
Oh, when you build the new roundabout, please make sure you put in at least one, if not two trash cans at that landing, and also, because there's going to be more use, and also a nice vault toilet. And toilets and trash cans are the key to keeping the river clean. Thank you.
No, Troy wants to jump in there.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. We've been working really closely with Norm ever since our inception. He approached me in clean. When I began this, it felt like nobody was really using the river, and now look at it. We're talking about way too many people on it, but a lot's changed in the last 7 years, and we do want to keep the river clean. We do want to be stewards. I like to say we do cleanups every day. Everybody on our tours, I actually brought this. Everybody gets one of these to carry their hoodie, water bottle, whatever it is in the bags. If they don't have one of these, they're not on my tour. We require everybody to wear one of these.
And I want to add that in all the years we've been doing the cleanups, we've never found one of those bags. Those bags, sometimes we found other people's coolers and stuff, but we've never found. That's an extremely good idea.
And the reason why we do this is so if anybody does go overboard or whatever, everything is contained. It's all in here. And we also encourage everybody that's on the river to grab trash and use this to do it. It's remarkable how many people actually use it and grab water bottles, beer cans, whatever it is, to get them out of the river. So what Norm is doing is awesome, and having garbage cans at all the access points and all the landings and anywhere that there can be one on the river extremely helps.
So we're going to close here. I want to go to Patrick quickly and then to you, Steve. So Patrick, earlier you made a pretty compelling case. People applauded that maybe what we need is not another management plan. What would you suggest people do who are energized about these issues?
I was fishing one time, and this guy coming down in a kayak yelled at me. And my initial reaction was, "What did you just yell at me?" And he yelled, "Which side would you like me to pass on?" And I think that if someone passes where you're casting, you say, "Hey, next time my buddy's downstream here," or whatever, it's etiquette to ask. And so I think that what we all do is kind of take a little bit of ownership in the education of our peers.
Steve, I'll give you the last word.
Well, again, as you heard from many people here, that we are on the, there are areas that we need to manage, the use of the river, and the numbers, and especially during the peak hot summertime, is it's a busy river. But I think there's been a lot of other requests commercially. Again, there was a request to use the Sheck's Landing and Brown Bridge for commercial operation for those tubes. And there was also one where this gentleman who didn't even have any frontage on the river wanted to just shuttle up to 100 canoes and kayaks a day from one site to another. But so we got to get I think, again, we're not at a crisis right now, but we have to be ready to respond to additional pressure because, again, we're seeing a different river with these dams out. It's brought more attention, and we just need to be ready to, for the sake of the river. Because when we start looking at the river, as Hank said in the past, as a commodity, the river always loses.
Okay, great. Thanks to our panel.